I snagged a massive half marathon PR last weekend of 1:15:57. My former PR was it was 2 weeks post-surgery. Little Michael Scott snip snap.
Snip snap, snip snap,
You know what I mean? And so I ran a 1:21:48 there. And it was a month after my 2:48 marathon in Carmel. I probably could have gone under 1:20 in that previous one, but still just a massive PR in this half marathon. If you haven't seen the race film, you can watch it here if you'd like. It's linked in the description as well. But let's just dive right in. If you've been following along with the Chicago 242 series, you've seen that I've been making huge gains in fitness. I ran a 35:35 10K, which is not indicative of my fitness even now. I ran a 5,000 meter in 16:33, which is almost exactly the same fitness as this half marathon. And now the half marathon to prove that I could at least do half the distance of the marathon at that pace. I thought 240 would be a possibility within this training block, and now I'm not trying to settle for anything less. And I know that there's gonna be a lot of criticism for this mentality. People are gonna be like, you need to play it safe, blah, blah, blah. But truth is, this is gonna be my 10th marathon, and I'm 32 years old, and I don't wanna be knocking on the door of 40 in 7-8 years time thinking, man, I wish I would have gone after it harder. So yeah, more on that towards the end of this video. I don't think it's greedy to go for like 2:38 something or maybe even faster because of the fitness I have right now with a taper. So again, I'll talk about that more at the end of the video. The VO2 calculator online, VO2 dot whatever it is, that calculator has me at a 2:38:50 with this untapered half marathon effort at Hidden Gem. And that same calculator predicted a 1:15:50 half marathon based off of my 16:33 5,000 meter effort. So with a taper, these last few weeks of workouts and volume, which there aren't many workouts left, I'm gonna go for it. I'm going after it. I'll make a race strategy video as we get closer to Chicago in the weeks leading up. And so I'll share all that information, but it's been like changing week to week based on these workouts. And even just yesterday, I ran a 20-mile run, the fastest I ever have, with 9 miles at marathon pace in 3 different blocks, almost all of them at or under 6 flat per mile. And I felt amazing. Fueling went well, all of it went well. So it's looking good. Yeah, so jumping in the race, I picked up my bib the day before at the expo. It's like an hour south of where I live, so that was unfortunate. But I went to my cousin's wedding rehearsal, dress rehearsal dinner. So I probably should have just gotten my bib the morning of the race because it's a pretty chill race, but oh well. I drove down really early to get parking the morning of the race, and I met up with Isaac, who filmed the whole race and did an incredible job. Laced up, got into warm-ups. I did almost 2 miles of warm-up at about 7 a.m. Gun time was like 7:30, I think. And I was doing that at around 8 minutes a mile or 5 minutes a kilometer. And I didn't do any strides. I wasn't thinking about doing strides, but I probably should have, but didn't. And so, yeah, race was 7:30. Temps were perfect. Amazing temperature, 57 degrees at start, Fahrenheit, 14 degrees Celsius. There's no wind. It was sunny. It's like my favorite kind of weather. Like not too cold, but nice and crispy with sun. Love that. I brought my sunglasses, but maybe the humidity was still decent because my glasses just kept fogging up. So I ended up wearing them like through mile 1 or 2 and then ended up putting them on top of my hat and just raced with them on top of my hat. I almost lost them in the middle of the race. I felt that they were going back and thankfully repositioned them. Before the race, as far as nutrition went, I believe I had just a very simple bagel and a banana. That's it. And then right before the race, about 15 minutes before the race, I ate a Morton 100 caffeinated version. And then I kept my Spring Awesome sauce, which is 180 calories, in my pocket for the race if I felt like I needed it, but wasn't necessarily planning on using it if I didn't have to, which I didn't end up using in the race at all. So looking at the results from previous years in this race, I knew I could place in the top 30 or 40. So I made sure to get really close up front in the corral, close to the start line, so I wouldn't have to be weaving or pushing through people in the beginning of the race. And It was amazing. The trail was just super spacious. There were no barricades. There were no like horses or metal gates or anything like you see in races a lot. It was just full open road, and there was just tons of space. So I loved that about this race. It's still in its infancy. I think it's only 5 or 6 years old. So it might become a really popular race because it's awesome. I loved my experience. And if that's the case, they might start barricading it. But as for now, it was just so simple. The race was neighborhood vibes. People were out on their front lawns cheering, kids like blowing bubbles into the street, like a lady out in her robe, like cheering us on because it was early morning. It was super cool. I loved those vibes. We went through the first mile in 5:52, which was perfect. I was expecting to run at 5:50 pace for this race. And I don't know, that felt like really daunting and really scary. So to go out in 5:52 felt really good. It almost felt exactly on what I wanted to do on average. I got kind of boxed in that first mile, but that felt like a good thing. I almost like that happening in the first mile or two of a half marathon or marathon because it makes me relax. It forces me not to jump the gun and get out in front and be a rabbit, but to just kind of settle in, let other people break some wind for me, and then I can kind of get into my pacing in mile 2, 3, beyond. So mile 1.5, we spread out a bit, mile and a half, and I started following some folks that seemed to be going for about 5:50 per mile based on what I split in my first one and what my watch was predicting pace-wise. So we went through mile 2 in 5:48, and it felt super comfortable, which was wild to me. The fact that I manually split a 5:48. A lot of people are asking me on this video in the race vlog, why are you manually splitting your watch? This is just a practice I love doing in races because I never trust GPS fully to mark the distance perfectly. And especially with Chicago Marathon, you can never assume that the GPS is going to work with buildings and all the interference and everything. So most courses have accurate mile markers. And so if that's the case, then I'm going to be splitting it manually and ensure that I'm getting my right splits for every single mile to know if I need to speed up or slow down. There was one long mile in this race. I think it was mile 5. And so that messes up 2 miles. But as long as you know what the effort is and you feel like you're going that same pace, it's really not a problem. If it's a world major marathon like Chicago, the mile markers are going to be flawless. So yeah, I just make it a common practice to split that way unless I don't want to know what my splits are and I just want to go on effort, which I have never raced anything like that yet. So I just like knowing where I'm at and if I can maintain that pace. I love doing math in my head in the middle of the race. I know that might sound crazy, but that's just how I am. So we felt super comfortable through mile 2. I met Dan, who I stuck with the entire race, and Sergio at that point, just after mile 2. And we confirmed that we wanted to stick around 5:50 a mile. So through mile 3, we went 5:49, and then Dan and I really started working together. I asked him if he wanted me to lead. He was just like, let's just go. Like, don't worry about needing to switch on and off, because I felt like I was drafting on him quite a bit. And as we rounded a corner, I was like, do you want me to take the lead? He's like, dude, you just race how you want to race. I'll work around you however you want. So I was like, cool, sounds great. Through mile 4 in 5:48, felt so consistent. And just after this was just a beautiful downhill into mile 5, and I still just felt amazing. I remember having conversation with Dan in that moment, telling him like my former PRs at 121, and he was just like, what the heck, which didn't feel indicative of, but I still have been making massive gains this year, so that must have felt off-putting to hear. And he might have even thought like, oh, this guy's gonna get roasted in the second half. So I'm just happy I stuck with it. We went into the high school campus at Homewood Flossmoor, the high school in town. Tons of support between residents and cheerleaders and staff and the high school band. And one of my favorite moments of this year in racing, running through that band, and Isaac killed it with the shot of me just being super happy. And this is something I mentioned in my Instagram caption in this video I posted, is that I'm really trying to, in these moments, just put a smile on my face and really enjoy these moments that I love. Like, if I feel like the energy's there, I want to give it back to the crowd or to the band or whoever's there. And I know psychologically, I think there have been studies to show that helps your running. And I noticed that in Chicago last fall when I ran my 2:57. I was giving it back to the crowd. I was pointing to people. I was smiling. I was, enjoying everything. And I think from now on, that's just how I want to race, because it just puts me in a better mood, and I feel like it helps me perform so much better. So yeah, we went through the band, missed the mile 5 split, like I said, because that was the mile that was kind of off, but there was just a lot of stuff going on. I knew we were still cruising. We were still on the same pace. Yeah, through the band, I like started taking off. I was probably going like 5:30 a mile at that point, just going way too fast out of, from adrenaline. And maybe that's a negative to that mentality. But then Dan quickly caught me as we went back into the neighborhood. We lost Sergio at that point, but then Nelson, who joined us, who said he watched the channel, which is always so encouraging on the course to hear. It's super cool. He's been watching the Chicago series. He joined us right about mile 6, which was a 5:42 split, which makes sense going through the band kind of quickly. This just kind of set the tone for pacing for the rest of the race, or at least the middle third. So there were lots of turns on this course. It was kind of crazy looking at the map. It was a reoccurring comment that people said, like, there's just so many turns and it's a lot of weaving, but it didn't really feel that way as we were running it. It's kind of gentle rolling hills, nothing serious. I mean, it's Illinois. But yeah, in the back half, there were some ones that like you felt it when you ran them. But I really actually kind of like those rollers because it gives you something to work off of, especially the downhills feel so nice. So started locking into like 5:42 to 5:45 pace per mile with Dan and Nelson. And we just started alternating turns leading, but I was mostly just following Nelson. Nelson's really tall. He's like 6'2", 6'3". Shout out Nelson. He was a beast in this race. He was breaking a lot of the wind for me and for Dan. And yeah, we were just working off of each other. Mile 7 was 5:45. We overtook someone pretty quickly right around here. And that was just a huge psychological boost. Made us, I assume, made me feel really good about what we were doing. And it still felt pretty comfortable. I started to feel it, but I knew that we could absolutely handle another half of this pace. So took some Gatorade right after mile 7. Not necessary at all, but just wanted to drink something, get some quick sugar. Yeah, Dan fell back, so I just clung to Nelson. I thought we might have been dropping Dan, so he accelerated into mile 8, so I just followed him. Had this little uphill section coming out of this viaduct, and I just remember being like, just turn the legs over and like work this uphill. It was a huge psychological boost because I just love pushing through sections like that. And I was able to catch up to Nelson, and Dan quickly caught us again. So we caught him before 8. We started working together again, went through mile 8 and 5:45. So we're just like steady at this point. Like I said, slightly rolling hills through this section. Didn't really feel them until mile 8. There's a pretty significant uphill and then the downhill in this section that we needed to grind through to really maintain that 5:42 to 5:45 pace. Mile 9 was 5:42 and Dan was right back on our heels. We were all clearly starting to feel the effort at this point. Being so close in position just pushed us all to maintain that pace. I truly don't think I would have run this time without these two. And so I'm going to make it a point in future races that if I can work off people, I'm absolutely going to do that. And there'll obviously be plenty of people to work off of and work with in Chicago. So I'll definitely be doing that. I'll be chatting with people. I know my buddy Sam is going to be super close to my pace, and we're probably going to end up running the whole first half together right around 6 flat to 6:03 per mile in Chicago. The last 3 miles of the race were pretty flat. Before the last mile wasn't that flat. There were lots of turns again, so we're just trying to run tangents as best as possible. If you don't know what tangents are, it's basically the most direct line between turns. And so if you're turning right and then turning left down the road, you want to run a diagonal line from each corner, from one corner to the next, to try to get as little distance as possible, not add any more distance to your race. So running the tangents as best as possible. In this section, we were doing a lot of just running in single file line. And Dan took the lead through 10, and we went through 10 at 5:47 for that mile. Overtook one of Dan's teammates at 10.5, which was another psychological boost. And although the effort was getting really hard at this point, we were just maintaining. We started to fall off pace a bit here through 11. We went through 5:51 on that mile, clearly starting to fall off pace, but headed back into downtown with Dan in the lead and Nelson trailing behind me now. And a few uphills through mile 12, which were brutal. I remember feeling like this is getting really hard now. That resulted in the slowest mile split of 5:57, but we were also passed by one of Nelson's teammates there, and I was just holding on for dear life. That's the point where you're like, I don't care if people are passing me. I don't really even know what's going on around me. It's just survival mode. This is the part where I start to do math and count down backwards. So if I know I'm running right around 6-minute mile pace and I just passed the 12-mile marker, I'm starting to count back from 360 and just survive this 360 seconds and get close to the finish line. I know a lot of people have told me that I'm crazy for doing that too, but that just helps me a ton. I feel like if I can count back from 300, I know I can survive at any point for 300 seconds. Just maintain for 300 seconds and I'll be fine. So that's what I did. And then I end up losing track because most of the time something crazy happens at the end, or you're just so exhausted and just staring at the finish line. The first point in the race where I was like truly running alone was this last mile, just chasing Dan. I just had my eyes locked on Dan. He was kind of taking off and I was like, just follow him. And I remember seeing the half-mile left sign, said half mile to go, and wanting to die and just fully in the pain cave. We had a right-hand turn, and then it was a straightaway all the way to the finish. But it was a slight uphill, so you couldn't see the finish line. And so, I was just maintaining. But then I saw a banner up ahead across the road, and I was like, oh, okay, great, that's the finish line. So I started stepping on the gas and doing my typical, burn my final match, sprint finish, get to the finish line as fast as possible. So I started speeding up. I caught Dan and then realized that was a false finish. It was a sign that said Mardi Gras across the street. And I don't even know if I think there was Mardi Gras music playing or something. I don't remember any of the visuals apart from just trying to find the finish line at this point. So I backed off because I was just hurting a ton now and just being like, I have no idea how far it is at this point. It's got to be somewhere around 500 meters at the most because we just passed the half mile. We've been running for at least a quarter mile. And so I backed off and then I saw red flags and I was like, oh, okay, that's the finish line. And so I started accelerating again. And then I realized this is another false finish because that was mile 13. And I'm just, at this point, I'm starting to get full tunnel vision, and then I started feeling nauseous, and then I started gagging really badly, and I'm like, oh, I feel like if I try to push on the gas anymore, I'm just gonna puke, and I will lose this pace entirely. So I'm just trying to back off and keep it easy, not trying to beat Dan, not trying to overtake him, let him go, eased up. So I relinquished the idea of passing him completely, just focused on not throwing up and just getting to the finish. And then as soon as I crossed the finish line, I was fully exhausted, pull off to the side, heaved about 3 times. Not too much came out, but definitely puked. But after that, I felt great. And it was just such a cool experience at the finish line. Made a bunch of new friends between Dan and Nelson and other people that were there. John, who got his sub 130, who I met prior to the race. And just people who are going to be running Chicago. Nelson and I have been in DMs. I've connected with Dan on Instagram. It's so cool to just communicate with them and encourage each other as we get into our fall marathon season. And it was also just really cool just being at a finish line with the top 30 and people who have really been working super hard for years to get these kinds of times. Just that mutual respect and appreciation. Maybe even non-verbally, just recognizing that is really cool. And to then have conversations with those people who have that same kind of fitness as you is, I don't know, it's just really special. Made me feel really accomplished to just be in that crowd.
PR, the GPR?
Oh, huge. 1:15:57 unofficial.
That is crazy.
Yeah. I can't believe I broke 1:16. It's crazy.
My favorite part was the band.
Yeah. I was going nuts.
Your cadence was matching with the beat too. So it was
I went way too fast through that tunnel.
This race was just a massive confidence booster going into Chicago. I set the goal back in April of 2:42 because it was horrifying. It scared me. But as I said in the beginning of this video, now that I see this fitness in this tune-up race, untapered, 2:42 just doesn't feel like enough of a challenge at this point. I could play it safe and I could run a 2:41, but I don't feel like that's going to be pushing myself to the limit. And truth be told, that's what I wanted to do last fall to get my sub 3. I knew I was in sub 3 shape and I knew I wanted to play it safe and finally get a sub 3 marathon. And that's what I did. And it even felt kind of that way in Carmel as well. My buddy Sam was also in that race, and he was the entire race a quarter mile to a half mile ahead of me, and I could see him on the straightaways the entire race. And he, before the race, was telling me to come with him, and I decided not to because I had a goal in mind of getting under 250 for that race. This one, I'm not feeling the same. I don't feel as tied to 242 as I have for these previous 2 marathons, and I know that a sub 240 is absolutely possible. And something I posted on Instagram today is, I don't know, how much further under 240 can I get? That's a game I'm gonna have to play with myself, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to run stupid. That means I'm definitely still going to run smart and trust the fitness that I have based on these markers, the workout I just did yesterday in this half marathon tune-up. That's what I want to do. And I'm thinking I want to go through the half in 119 or maybe a little bit under and see if I could pull out a negative split in Chicago. And so I'll touch more on that on my race day strategy video. And I'm sure I'll get some hate. I'm sure people are going to tell me I'm greedy, and maybe that is the case. I don't know. If I feel right that day and trust on my experience going into my 10th marathon now, I do think that is absolutely possible to dip down into 239, 238, maybe even 237. Just take a fair crack at it. So I hope this breakdown was helpful or entertaining or whatever. Hopefully going to get a few more episodes of Chicago 242 before race day. Be on the lookout for shakeout run information. I am in the midst of planning that with a few internet friends, and I think it's going to be a pretty cool event. So keep a lookout for that between Instagram and here on YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram at floberg.runs. See you on the internet fairly soon. Bye.